See what the audio sounds like.
Hello. Can you hear me? I am talking into the mic. I don't know if it is actually working.
I don't know either. I can't hear shit.
I'm unmuted.
There we go. Okay.
All right, we're good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So, oh god. Inception. Reminder to put your phones on silent. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you guys about Hackintosh'ing tonight. So for anyone that doesn't know, my name is Brandon, and I'm going to talk to you guys about the art of the Hackintosh, and it's a dive into the mystical world that Apple doesn't really want anyone to know about, but there's a huge community behind it. How does this actually work? Slow. So first off, what is a Hackintosh? What defines a Hackintosh? It's essentially a computer that is a PC hardware, but this is not working, so I'm gonna stop that. But it's essentially OS 10 running on Apple, not Apple sanctioned hardware. So I have one of my machines here that I've built, and I'll go into in-depth and show you guys. Basically, it's just a PC, but it's a matter of getting the right hardware and the right combination of software and drivers, which are KEX in the OS 10 world, and getting it up and running. So it's a PC aspiring to be a Mac is the basis of it. But you're probably thinking, well, why would I do this? Because I can just go and buy a Mac and pay Apple lots of money, and they build it for me, and they deliver it to my house. You can do that, but there's three things to building a Hackintosh that might entice you. It's extremely cost-effective, and I have a slide on that a couple ahead. And you learn something about computer that you probably wouldn't know before. If you're running Windows and you see this big black box sitting on your desk and you don't know what it does or what it is, you don't really sort of understand how your computer works. So it's an experience in itself to build the PC if you want to go that route, or there are services that pre-make the hardware and don't come with OS 10 installed. To sort of get around Apple's EULA, it actually explicitly says in there that you're not allowed reselling hardware that has OS 10 pre-installed on it. So, and of course, overall, it's fun. It's, you know, if you love working with hardware or building computers and stuff, it's just fun. You know, what you can do is you can take this boring-looking iMac or a Mac Pro, this is a G5 here, and turn it into like a hot rod that looks like this. Like, look at how beautiful that looks compared to the stock. I don't know. I find it's nice. It's the black on the aluminum. It's, you know, it's a change from what Apple has made in the past. So and this is just one of thousands of different builds out there. Like, this is taking Apple hardware and turning it into a Hackintosh. You essentially take the soul out of it and put in a new soul. So I did a PC part picker build back when I was supposed to do this talk 2 months ago for a lightning talk, and I've actually I have a new one that's based on the Tony Mac x86, which is a community of Hackintoshers. They put out a build guide every month, and it's all recommended compatible hardware that's generally a gigabyte. And video cards that are either NVIDIA or AMD. So I have a decent Core i5 quad-core processor, a nice internally liquid-cooled CPU cooler, gigabyte motherboard, lots of RAM, SSD, an overclocked 2 gigabyte video card, and pretty decent case, nice power supply, and a 27-inch IPS monitor. And that clocks in at 1889. But if you take that same build and get it with current hardware, it's actually a lot cheaper. This is using February's build guide. I put this together. If you get that same thing from Apple, you're spending $3,000 or more to get same configured hardware that's relatively on the same pace as it. The processors that are usually in these are surface mounted, so you can't even upgrade them as well. You have to buy the i7 model or the i5 model. The plus side is you can upgrade CPU in a PC, so provided that you can find one that's the same socket set, same socket type. So it's the same processor clock speed, like I said, same RAM capacity, even 1600 megahertz DDR3 RAM. It's the same SSD capacity. I think it's actually 6 gigs more because the other one's 250, but you know. And that clocks in at almost $3,000.
What about the display?
So that's where you sort of lose out on this. It's like you get nothing compares to Apple's like their 5K Retina displays. Like you can buy 4K screens that are made in Korea. Like you can get Samsung ones. There's Dell ones now. They don't compare, and that's really where you lose out if you don't decide to go this route. But the fact that if your screen and display goes, you have to ship your computer back. So you sort of, it's a trade-off of like, do you want to learn and have fun building it, or do you want to just sit there, click a couple things, and order a Mac off the internet? You know. So, so some of you might say this is really cool and all. I want to learn more. Where do I start? The Tony Mac x86 community has a great resource for this. They actually just put it out yesterday. Sort of a little summary of like areas that you can start with and look at. They have the Custom Mac Buyer's Guide, which is what I based mine off of. The build that I put together, the February one. I built this one using the PC Part Picker guide. And there's tons of supported hardware. So if you can think of a piece of hardware that you want to use and Google the model number, you can generally find some hardware that is compatible or something that's similar. So I will go back here if I can. Oops. So yeah, they also have a really nice getting started guide as well. And this outlines, oh, that's the same one. Why did I put it in there twice? I think it's this one. So Guide Beast. It's an interactive guide on how to get started setting up the USB installer drive and getting OS X installed on your computer, and then using a tool called MultiBeast, which allows you to install the KEXs to get your hardware up and running. So NVIDIA has some video cards that work out of the box and some that don't, so you might have to enable some flags in the startup. There's one called Graphics Enabler. You set it to yes or no. And it's not a lot of configuration, but there's some configuration, so you have to do a lot of research in order to sort of be comfortable with doing it. But again, that's all part of the learning process of it. So some of the prerequisites that you need in order to start building your own Hackintosh are hunger for learning and knowledge of hardware. If it's your first time building a computer, you're going to learn a heck of a lot about it. If you're already building computers, it could just be another build to you, but installing OS X is a whole nother ballgame, and getting it stable and running. And another prerequisite is you can read and follow instructions well, and it's extremely key because there's a lot of the guides that you can follow. If you skip a step, you can screw yourself. It can really bite you in the butt later if you don't follow some of them. And of course, you need some money to burn. You can't spend $300 and get a decent computer and turn it into a Hackintosh. So that is one of the requirements. So I will jump into the getting one set up. I was supposed to have a cable to hook my computer up here and show you guys a working system, but unfortunately that didn't work out. So, so one of the things that you need to decide before you start is the motherboard that you're buying, if it supports EFI or UEFI, or if it's a legacy bootloader. So my system is 2 years old today, and I think the hardware was about 9 months old when I bought it. So it supports UEFI. So if you buy a computer or hardware that's within a 5 to 7 year range, I'd say, at the beginning of that you might get UEFI hardware, but anything past that recently, you'll be able to buy UEFI hardware. Otherwise, you're kind of stuck with the master boot record sort of way of getting it set up. And there's 2 utilities that can help you with that. One of them is Chameleon and Chimera. They are a bootloader that you install to get your computer up and running for your Hackintosh. Essentially, Chimera is Chameleon under the hood, but with a few tweaks and a few modifications by the Tony Mac x86 community. So there's a bunch of core people that commit to GitHub, and they have a bunch of different branches where they test things on, and they branch off and then essentially go back, and that's what makes up Chimera. And the other one that you can use for EFI bootloading is Clover. So I will go into these a little bit. So Chimera, like I said, is essentially Chameleon, and these are the logos for them. So you'll probably see them in your travels if you're learning. So, like I said, use Chameleon and Chimera for master boot record based hardware. If your motherboard doesn't support UEFI, unfortunately, you're going to have to go with this one. But I'll cover Clover in a minute here. It's the easiest to use Chimera to get up and running. It's actually if you do any reading, it's actually what they recommend you start with, because it's easy the Chimera itself is easy to configure. It's just a bunch of checkboxes, and based on research that you do in order to pick your hardware and stuff, you can sort of deduce which options you need to check in order to actually get it up and running. Clover, which is the EFI-based bootloader, is current. So if you want to build a computer, you are more future-proof going with a UEFI-based bootloader and using Clover, because it can actually boot any EFI-based system, or operating system, sorry. The downside is the configuration is a little harder because the options aren't as blatant. It's a matter of putting files in the proper folders when you set up your USB drive, rather than just a bunch of checkboxes, which may or may not be easier for some people, but again, if you can read and follow instructions, you shouldn't have a problem. And so, like I said, it does depend on what you pick to begin with, but if you do pick Chimera and your hardware, if you do pick Chimera out of the ease of use and ease of setup, you can upgrade to Clover if you have a UEFI supported motherboard. So there's a nice guide here on a website called Skyline OS 10 from switching from Chameleon or Chimera to Clover, and he goes into detail here about where to download it and some of the checkboxes in order to set it up. This is the first step of actually setting up Clover. Migrating your DSDT and your KEX from Chameleon and getting it actually running in the OS is the second step of it. So like I said, Gigabyte motherboards have the highest compatibility rating for your hack and for OS X support. You can use ASUS. I have seen some LAN party boards, very, very few, be supported. And there's a couple of obscure sort of motherboards that some people have gotten running, but not necessarily stable. And if you are going to pick a Gigabyte motherboard, pairing it up with an Intel CPU is probably your best bet. Though there are some methods by IATCOS, I hope I pronounced that properly, for getting up and running on an AMD CPU. They have different CPU architectures, and Intel is the official supported one for OS X, so your best bet is to go with that. As for video cards, as long as you check the model number, it should be fine. There's a compatibility table in some of the buyer's guides of which ones are supported and which ones aren't necessarily supported. Excuse me. And then RAM, your power supply, CPU cooler, and all that stuff, they're fine as long as they're compatible with your motherboard, your CPU, and obviously your case. If your CPU cooler pokes out a little bit and your side door might not close, that can be a problem. So I was going to show you guys at this point working system, but unfortunately I don't, so that sort of cut like 10 minutes off my time. So I'm just unfortunately going to have to jump into setting up iMessage. So one of the core features of OS X is iMessage, the sort of interoperability between your iPhone, iPad, any iDevice essentially, messaging system between it. If you're familiar with using an iPhone, the screen and text is blue rather than green for sending SMS or iMessage. But on Hackintosh, it's sort of broken. Apple has a lot of authentication schemes in order to authenticate and activate your device. So iMessage sort of works if you're willing to work at it. I had it not working for many months, and I just kept trying and trying, and I actually almost gave up on working on my Hackintosh. I almost just nuked the drive and installed Windows 8, God forbid. But if you use Clover, it's actually 100% working. So it's really just the master boot record-based bootloaders that don't work. So the sort of rundown to getting it working is you build your Hackintosh, get all your hardware in the case, get it running and stuff. Get Unibeast installed on your USB drive and get OS X installed. I won't run through that because there's many tutorials and stuff out there that cover it. You run the Clover configurator, and the part that actually is kind of confusing is creating your system definition. So in order to emulate Hackintosh and have Apple sort of accept it into the Apple world as its own, it's sort of a wolf in sheep's clothing at this point. You have to create multiple, like SMUUID, which is sort of the identifier for the computer. There's an MLB that you have to create, and the ROM, which is derived. The MLB and the ROM are derived from sort of unknown areas of the computer, and there's a bunch of people that are doing research into figuring out how Apple actually generates these. So when you're building a Hackintosh, you actually just hit a button to randomize it and hope to God that it works. And then so at this point, once you've generated those IDs, you reboot, you log into iMessage, and hope that you don't get the try activating later message, and you rejoice. It should work at that point. And the good news is, if you don't want to listen to me drone on, you can find all of the stuff that I was just talking about documented here. They just did a really big revamp of this guide here. It used to be the absolute worst thing to read and the hardest thing to follow. It's half as hard to follow now, so that's a plus. It's still kind of confusing for newcomers, but in order to get iMessage working, it does take a little bit of reading. There are many chapters of this wall of text. So it's a good read if you're into that and you want to get it working. Otherwise, you can stop at installing and getting it set up and just making it stable. I thought I had more, but I don't. So happy hacking. I hope you guys enjoyed this quick presentation on creating Hackintosh. If you want to follow me on Twitter, my handle is right there. And if you have any questions, definitely answer or ask them right now.
There's one.
Awesome. Okay, so we got one here. Will the ghost of Steve Jobs haunt me if I install OS X on a PC? Yes, he will, Dylan. He will come and haunt you in your sleep.
I've got one.
So is like going back to your earlier slides, you had the cost breakdown and discrete, like there's about $1,000 difference, right?
Yep.
Minus discrete, you can get $100 bucks, but you could easily spend another $1,000 on an Apple Cinema display.
Yeah, easily. Yeah. And so the thing with that is the Apple Cinema displays, they aren't Retina quite yet. So if you want to buy one of the Apple Cinema displays, they're great monitors. I've used one myself, and I would buy one in a heartbeat if I had $900 to burn. So the reason that where's that slide here? The reason that I brought up this one here, this is one of the highest rated Asus monitors. So for $554, that's a pretty good buy. Of course, you can get other ones. The Dell makes them. BenQ makes them as well. But if you wanted to pick up an Apple Cinema display and you had some money to burn, that almost still puts you under that threshold of $3,000. So
is that monitor a 4K monitor?
I believe so, yes.
All right, another question then.
Yeah.
So I noticed that your part picker kind of like brings and matches up against somewhat I guess it's an upper end iMac. Is that an upper end iMac or is it a base level?
So if you to buy the 27-inch iMac Retina 5K, which I believe is one of the higher end models. You can definitely get something like build a Hackintosh for a lot cheaper than this. This was sort of an example of just like what you can do compared to what Apple has to offer. I have in one of the slides here. I don't know where it is. I can get to it from here. Buyer's guide. So they list, what I based mine off of is the, believe it or not, the Custom Mac Budget ATX build. And I picked, pretty sure it was this motherboard. I picked this CPU. I did a 16 gigabyte RAM build, 250 gig SSD. And I'm pretty sure it was all these two for the case and the power supply unit. Of course, you can get the Core i3 processor, 8 gigs of RAM, which is still more than enough that you need in order to get up and running, and the 120 gig drive. I actually have OS X installed on a 64 gig, like probably 6-year-old SSD in here, and it starts up in like 5 seconds. So
late 2009. Put an SSD in, and
yeah,
brings it new life.
Oh yeah, I did that with my old MacBook Pro. So.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you actually get the OS X operating system, and what is the legality of that?
So there's nothing in the end user license agreement that says you can't do it, but you're not allowed selling hardware that isn't Apple sanctioned with OS X installed on it. So there was a company called SciStar. They settled out of court, I believe, don't quote me on that, with Apple, I think early 2000. They used to sell computers, Hackintoshes, that were pre-sold with OS X on them, and Apple went after them and said, hey, you're not allowed doing this. And since then, Apple hasn't really done anything to stop us from being able to do this. So it almost makes me wonder that Apple actually doesn't care that we're doing this. There's really no security methods in place to stop you from installing OS X on non-supported hardware. If you can get the right KEX installed, my computer is as stable as any Mac. So Yeah.
You just basically, so to get the software, just walk into an Apple store and buy, you can even, I just don't know where you buy the software.
So that's one of the tricky parts. If you want to go with the long way around, you can start at Snow Leopard, so 10.6, and because they sold physical CDs. So if you have a CD, I don't have a CD-ROM in mine because I use USB drives. But if you want to start there, you can install Snow Leopard. There are tools that you can install Snow Leopard on the computer. Get that installed. Download the App Store. Download 10.7. Get that installed because you can just do the upgrade. And I believe you have to fix permissions on the drive and do a couple things. Excuse me. Open the App Store again. Download 10.8, which is Mavericks. No, that's Mountain Lion. And then download 10.9. And then what you can do is, if you wanted to start there, they used to sell USB drives with Mavericks. Actually, I believe they sold them with Lion on it. But if you wanted to start there, you could use one of those USB drives and modify it with an actual install. And then just sort of do the upgrade process. It's almost like if you have a Windows Vista disk and you want to do the upgrade process to Windows 8.1 from there. It's sort of just like you iterate through it, do the upgrade process, put in your key or a fake key just to get it installed and stuff. So
it'd just be nice if I could go out and buy the. How expensive is the operating system?
So Snow Leopard, I believe, was $29. They don't sell it anymore. I think they've long since taken it off the shelves. I'm not going to tell you where to get it, but I know that you can acquire it if you do a Google search, combining the words lion and torrent.
Yeah. I was more concerned with, can I do this at work to my work PC to elude it kind of thing?
That's up to you. That's a venture that you want to take. I would definitely research the model of the motherboard. That'd be the first place to start, and that'll tell you whether or not you can do it. Now that's whether you can do it with the support of the community. That's the big factor. Is like Tony Mac has 500,000+ people. Now that's whether or not they have a lot of spam accounts in there. But their community is thriving, and there's people creating builds every day. They have a golden build section where the guy who runs the site, Tony Mac, he actually selects them and promotes them through the Twitter account as well. And he posts articles and all that sort of stuff.
So I'm thinking virtual hardware.
Yeah, so the one thing I didn't cover here is if you don't want to do this to your hardware, you can actually run OS 10 in a virtual machine. It's a lot trickier, and it's outside of my knowledge scope. I've done it before, but that was way back in Snow Leopard and Lion.
I did it back in 2003 is the last time.
Yeah, and there's people that have been able to install OS 9 on old hardware too. So it's not out of the realm of reality, but it definitely takes a lot of research and know-how. So. Have any questions in there? No.
Any other questions in the room?
No.
Any problems with the store then? You said you've been able to, sounds like buying stuff on the store isn't too much of a problem?
It's legitimate. You know, Apple sees my computer as a Mac. I haven't really had any problems with it. I'm putting my credit card in. I have a MacBook. I have an iPad at home. I have an iPhone. So as far as Apple is concerned, I have all Mac hardware.
Does Apple need you to buy software per computer, or can you buy it?
No, that's actually when the App Store came out. That was one of the nice things. People had a lot of misconceptions about it, where they thought that I have to set up my Apple ID and software is purchased per computer. It's actually nice because once you buy it, it's on your account. So you own sort of a virtual license to use that software. So you don't have to buy it per computer.
Nice.
Yeah. Depending on the software,
I think most things
it's account wide.
From the apps, like the Mac App Store.
Yeah.
I think those are more of a user license.
Yeah.
There used to be rules about like you can install it on like at most 5 machines or whatever.
Yeah.
And that might still be the case. I'm not sure.
I have some software that you can't buy from the App Store. That when you buy it, you still get a license key. You have to hide that somewhere. And yeah, sometimes it can only be activated up to a certain amount of times. I haven't used this, but Apple released the family support thing. So I don't know how that applies, where you can have sub-Apple accounts off of a main Apple account and sort of share software between them.
It works anything like the iPhone version? Terribly.
Yeah.
Me and my wife ended up just using the same Apple ID.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that do that.
We've been doing that for years, and I tried to make this new system.
Yes.
Let's use it the way we intended it.
Yeah, when it has beta attached to the name and it's from Apple, I'm sort of curious about it.
Steam did it a lot better.
Yes.
Steam, the sharing was awesome.
Yeah. So, yeah.
About how long do you have to wait? So like, if they release a new, let's say, security update, like a 10 point, they go from like, what is it? What are we at now?
10.2.
Yeah.
So
what if they go to like .3? Do you have to wait a while before you install that?
A little bit. Like it depends on how early adopter-ish you want to be. They have a guide here. If I can find it, Yosemite desktop support. When 10.2 came out, I gave it about a week for them to sort of figure it out and get any issues sort of ironed out. I know initially, so when Apple releases updates, they do one through the App Store and then a combo update or a standalone update. Sorry, 3. I know that there was an issue with the combo update. If you downloaded it, or if you were on 10.1 going to 10.2, it only worked on 10.0 to 10.2. So there was some update that happened in that time period that sort of broke some Hackintoshes.
Right.
So, but yeah, to answer your question, I maybe wait a week. That's when they got the most recent update sort of ironed out.
What about people building laptops? Have you heard of that?
Yeah, so they actually have a really nice section on the website for laptop compatibility. And so there are some people that have laptops working, and quite a array of them. I know that there's the HP Envy is probably the most widely hacked laptop with OS 10 installed on it. But as you can see here, there's a whole bunch of different, like there's Dell, there's Asus, Lenovo, MSI, Toshiba. So it really depends on the hardware. And again, this sort of backdates to make sure you do your research before you just go and wipe or install Windows or whatever was on your computer before.
Because I've often considered doing it, but more to build sort of like equivalent Mac Pro.
Mm-hmm.
So high-end server type thing.
Yeah, so I know the HP Envy came in like an i7 configuration with like 8 gigs of RAM, and I think probably a 7200 RPM 500 gig hard drive, which you could easily swap out for an SSD if you wanted. But it's sort of the equivalent of a MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
So without the stability, like there isn't such thing as 100% stability because it's not a real Mac.
Well, I was actually talking about I was interested in the laptop thing, but like from my personal interest in building one, it's more about trying to replicate one of those, not necessarily the case, but the innards of one of those.
Oh, the Mac Pro, the garbage can.
Yeah, the garbage
can. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so those...
You're not worried about, like, I'm not worried about matching the monitor, you know.
Yeah, so...
It's just like, I want something that's cheaper than their ridiculously priced gear that I can build on my own.
Only like 20 or 30 grand. You fully stock it out.
So it's actually kind of funny that you say that. There's a bunch of people that have created garbage can lookalikes.
Yeah, no thanks.
Namely, they usually use like a mini ITX board, and it's kind of funny. There's this company that sells that linked back to the Tony Mac website. There's a company that sells this shell that looks identical to the Mac Pro, the shell of it, and if you cut out the top, like this hole here, and create the fins that go on the top for where the fan is, it looks almost identical. Yeah, here, this person I think on the forum here, there's some templates for those fins, and a lot of people cut them out of balsa wood so that they're really light and they're decently strong. But after painting and putting it together, like if you were to take one glance at that, you would think that it was a special edition red Mac Pro. So.
Until you look inside.
Yeah. Until you looked at the back and actually took a close look at it and realized, hey, wait a minute, this thing isn't real. So it is possible. So there you go.
Have you heard of many people dual booting Windows?
Yes, I have Windows 8 and OS 10 installed on my Hackintosh here, which I wanted to demo to you guys to show you, but unfortunately I can't.
I think I have actually got compatible hardware.
Yeah, so there's an interesting thing, back to the master boot record based bootloader and the EFI based bootloader. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, Chimera doesn't have support for booting to Windows directly from the bootloader. You have to do it outside of the bootloader. So when your computer's booting up and it does the post beep, you just like hammer F12 or whatever your key is to bring up the drive selection and select the drive that Windows is installed on. With the EFI-based bootloader, Windows 8 uses UEFI loading, so you can boot to both OS 10 and Windows 8 if you installed it in EFI mode, because when you install it, there's 2 modes you can install it in. But yeah, you can boot to it from Clover. Yeah, so that's how I do mine. Yeah. Any more questions?
No.
No.
All right, we'll call it that.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for listening. And yeah, follow me on Twitter. I can answer any questions after this.